This program is for mature audiences only.
Fucking Barrow!
Please have your fake ID ready.
Some may find the following disturbing. Discretion is advised.
You unlock this sports talk show with the key of knowledge. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sight.
When he was single, I'll tell you what, Mark Burley was a great troller.
Really?
You know what? Oh, yeah. Mark Burley had some wonderful, wonderful eye candy that would come to the games when he was single, okay? So,
underline that.
You know,
A dimension of sound.
Which of the 10,000 stories you've heard Les say would he have used to respond to that question?
I don't know, Lee Elia comes to mind no matter what I ever ask him.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
A dimension of mind.
Right before they became the Chicago Cubs, they have a bunch of different names. Do you know what their name was right before they became the Cubs?
The Orphans.
You see, you're still cheating.
I don't know any of this shit.
You're entering a land of both debate and accord. A battle of wits. You've just crossed over into the Grobstein and Schuster zone.
I'm David Schuster, and looky here. He's not Les Grobstein. He's not Greg Gabriel. He's Aldo Gandia. It's almost like you're a quick change artist, you know, and that you just take on different personalities. Les is sort of stuck in the Twilight Zone, if you will. We can't find him. This is amusing as hell. We can't find Les, so Aldo is now, for the second time today, filling somebody else's shoes. And boy, they're smelly shoes, I'll be honest with you. Anyway, Aldo, can you give us a good Lee Elia story or something?
I've heard Les's Lee Elia stories so often, so many times that I can recite them word for word. But let's not do that on this show.
Yeah, let's please not do that. Anyway, all right, we can't find Les. Les might be calling in to his own show here, like right in the middle, and if he does, we'll bring him right up. But obviously, right now, Aldo and I will talk about the big news of the day, and it is big news of the day. No, it's not the Bears losing last night's game. We'll talk about that a little bit, too. But really no surprise, Aldo, that Theo Epstein has resigned as president of the Chicago Cubs, and that Jed Hoyer is moving up the totem pole and is taking his place. And we're going to play a couple of sound bites from both Theo Epstein and Tom Ricketts here in just a moment. But it's no surprise. I mean, Theo Epstein said all along that he was only going to be with the Cubs for 10 years, and he's leaving 1 year early, and he's going to give his reasons in this first soundbite in just a couple of seconds. But, you know, recapping everything, and we'll get your thoughts also, Aldo, you know, it was a successful 9 years. There's no other way of looking at it, because they did win a world championship. You know, a lot of people thought this would be a dynasty, and they would win 3 or 4 world championships. It hasn't panned out. But overall, I'd have to say that his tenure here in Chicago was a success.
Yeah, I have to agree. I don't particularly like the way he went about rebuilding this team. He basically tanked for 3 seasons, and there were tons of season ticket holders who said, screw this. And then seemingly overnight, but it wasn't overnight, it was 3 seasons of tanking, they became a really good baseball team, and then they actually won the World Series, I think most people would say, a year ahead of time. But then things started to kind of disintegrate quickly. He made so many questionable moves that when Ricketts says that we've got sustainable success because of Theo Epstein, you got to almost question that a little bit. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like this team is ready for another rebuild.
Well, he traded the future, there's no question about it, to win that World Series that they won back in 2016, and he thought that there was enough
technical difficulties
remnants of that scene 18-19. They were in the playoffs, of course, in 17 and 18, then not in 19. They got back here in 20 in the truncated season, but they never were able to get back to the mountaintop and get on top of it. So He gave up a lot of his minor league players, just to get Aroldis Chapman. He gave up a couple of players. To get Jose Quintana, he gave up a couple players to the White Sox. Those would have been building blocks to the next plateau, if you will. If you take a look back at Theo Epstein's overall, dealing here, he drafted, and he had high draft picks. He got Chris Bryant and Kyle Schwarber. He traded for some really good players, Anthony Rizzo, Jake Arrieta, Kyle Hendricks, Dexter Fowler, Aroldis Chapman, as we mentioned. He signed some good free agents in both John Lester and Ben Zobrist and Jason Hayward, who, a lot of money still on the dockets, if you will, but he helped them win the one world championship. He also spent a lot of money in some bad areas. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Is he leaving the franchise in a better place than when he first came in? I think the overall answer is yes. And Tom Ricketts has made a lot of money off that, and the fans did get their one world championship. It just, you get greedy after a while, to be honest with you, Aldo. Just like when the Bears won in '85. I thought they should win 3, 4, 5 Super Bowls in a row. It just doesn't always work out that way. Dynasties are really tough to have in sports. That's why, Bulls fans should be very happy they had the 2 3-peats, but it just didn't pan out to be a dynasty, if you will, for the Cubs.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on everything you said. I couldn't agree more, and I think that, history is going to look fondly on Theo, but, those of us who have been long-suffering Cubs fans, and I was for many, many years, and then I turned my allegiance over to the White Sox because I just got frustrated after a while of rooting for the Cubs and having my heart broken over and over again. But we're always going to be a bit dissatisfied that we didn't have that multiple championships. But like you said, it is a very, very difficult thing to accomplish. And, it's going to be interesting to see what Jed Hoyer does now as he succeeds Theo as the president of baseball operations. What do you know about Jed Hoyer? What has been your interactions with him? And do you have confidence that he can get this team back into the World Series?
Very positive interactions with Jed Hoyer over all the years. Obviously, he's run one franchise already. I mean, he was with Theo originally in Boston. Then he went off on his own to San Diego. He was in charge of the Padres for a couple of years. He knows what it's like to work from the ground up, moving all the way up to the top of the totem pole. Theo Epstein brought him here to Chicago to groom him to ultimately get to this day. I mean, this has been talked about for 2 or 3 years. Theo Epstein said that he would stay 10 years. True to his word, he was going to leave after 10, but as he says in this upcoming soundbite, he tells you why he decided to leave at this time. I think Jed Hoyer has a little bit more on his plate right now. I mean, he still has the nucleus of a good ball club, but they have some major, major decisions. In fact, why don't we hear from Theo Epstein why he decided to leave right now, and that'll sort of lead into what Jed Hoyer has to deal with going forward.
This summer, it became apparent to me for a number of reasons that we should strongly consider moving up the date of the transition by a year. First of all, it became really clear that we'd be facing some significant long-term decisions this winter, decisions with long-term impacts. And, those types of decisions are really best made by somebody who's going to be here for a long time, not just for one more year, and somebody who's invested in the organization for the long haul.
All right, so what he means by those long-term decisions, obviously that means what are you going to do with Chris Bryant? What are you going to do with Javier Baez? Are you going to allocate money for them to stay here on the long-term deals? Or are you going to trade them to start rebuilding if that's the direction that you want to go in? So, I think Theo Epstein is doing the right thing here, by the way, and turning it over. Let's face it, he and Jed Hoyer have talked about all these things previous, but it'll be Jed Hoyer's decision going forward, and it'll be really interesting to see, does he sign these two guys that I just made mention of? What does he do with Kyle Schwarber? Does he want to trade Yu Darvish when Yu Darvish has got great trade return as of right now? Or do they want to just keep building around some of these players like I mentioned? That's why I think Theo Epstein decided to turn the reins over right now.
David, do you think it's possible that Jed Hoyer could say, well, I'm going to do what Theo did. I'm just going to start from scratch, and that they trade some of these assets and not sign some of these players and reallocate those dollars to other younger budding stars? I mean, Javi Baez is a young star, but boy, his inconsistent play, he had a terrible 2020. it can be frustrating. But my question is, do you think that Jed could potentially blow everything up and start from scratch?
No, I don't think that, because let's take a look at where the Cubs were when Theo Epstein took over, as opposed to right now when Jed Hoyer is taking over. The Cubs were still a playoff team. They're still in a division that can easily be won upcoming next season, with some tinkering, of course. They do have some minor league prospects, some young pitchers, of which, unfortunately, they didn't have over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But now they do have a couple of kids that are a little bit lower levels, but should be okay in the next year, 2 or 3. So no, I don't think. And plus, right now in the big market, after what they went through already, I don't see that happening. So all the reasons that I stated, no, I don't see that happening. Now the real question is, what kind of money will be allocated to either sign some of these players or maybe go after some different players? The Cubs, I'm not going to ever cry poor for the Chicago Cubs or Tom Ricketts. Don't get me wrong, but they did lose a lot of revenue that they counted on to be in their baseball operations going forward, that they weren't able, like a lot of teams, maybe even more so the Cubs, from what happened with COVID this past season.
I agree. I think, take into account all of the real estate holdings that they've purchased, that has all had to have had a negative effect on the bottom line, because there's nobody going into the hotel that they built across the street from Wrigley Field. And some of the other things that they've invested on have really been ruptured by COVID. And, marquee TV, I think they're probably not as successful as they would have liked. They had a slow start because of the argument with Comcast and blah, blah, blah. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if the Ricketts said, all right, we spent like drunken sailors to win that World Series. Now it is time to tighten the belt. They had the 3rd highest salary in baseball for a number of years. And so it might be time now to get rid of the expensive assets and try to figure out a way to get back into the black as soon as possible.
It'll be really interesting to see what kind of direction the Cubs go in this offseason going into next year. And let's face it, the pandemic is not over. It probably won't be over to a certain degree, even when the upcoming season starts again in April. Will there be fans in the stands? Yada, yada, yada. But I don't think they're going to tear it apart, getting back to your original question. Let's hear also now from Tom Ricketts, because Ricketts and Theo Epstein, it's been a partnership, almost 10 years now. Anyway, here's Tom Ricketts remembering a lot of great times with Theo Epstein.
Theo came in 9 years ago. He hit the ground running, put together a brilliant staff, and early on promised us sustained success. And to a Cubs fan, that was a foreign concept. But then, after a few years of hard work and rebuilding the organization, he delivered sustained success. Not only did we have the 2016 World Series, which of course was the most remarkable and memorable World Series of all time, we had great playoff runs in years around that, and we sustained that success to go to the playoffs 5 of the last 6 years, and be considered a contender every year. So after 9 years of great work, Theo is leaving, but he's not leaving an organization in the lurch. We've been talking about this for a while. The organization is in great shape, and we look forward to the ongoing success of the Cubs.
And I think in that last part there of that soundbite, he pretty much answered your question also, Aldo, that they're not going to tear it apart and start from scratch right now. They're just too invested in the present, along with the future. They're going to try and further build up their minor league system, but they just have too many ingredients at the major league level. Plus, again, if you take a look at the landscape in their division, the Reds certainly came on at the end of this abbreviated past season. The Cardinals took a step backwards overall. The Brewers took a step backwards overall. And the Pirates were nowhere to be seen anyway to begin with. So, yeah, they're still going to be, go forward with what they have with an eye on the future at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. We are actually recording this show as the press conference with Theo is still going on. And on Marquee, they just put up a graphic of some of the key players that Theo Epstein has traded for during his tenure. Rizzo, Hendricks, Jake Arrieta, Fowler, Chapman. Those were all pretty, solid trades to get you, a championship and get you a very competitive team. So from that standpoint of some of the moves that he's made, he certainly has had some success. You can't argue with that. And I sometimes am a little critical of Theo, and perhaps people would say overly critical. But, congratulations to him. There's no doubt that his 9 years overall will be looked at as a success. He was asked during the press conference, is his baseball career over? I remember when you and Les had Paul Sullivan on, and Paul Sullivan said that he has been kind of suggesting to Theo, maybe he should get into politics and do something good for the world because he's such a smart guy and so forth. Well, Theo did say during this press conference that he is anticipating a third act in baseball, but that he wants to take some time off to be with his family, given how much time he's been away. So he wants to take care of some personal things, but he does have a third act in baseball. And then he also said some things that kind of led people to believe or speculate that perhaps he wants to come back, that third act, be more in an ownership position and not be held accountable to an ownership group, that he would be the ultimate say on things. And so maybe, he teams up with an A-Rod or who knows who else and purchases a Major League Baseball team. Do you think that is even remotely possible?
More than remotely possible. I mean, I think baseball will either expand to some other cities. Nashville's been mentioned a couple of times, and maybe some other places around the country, or do just like you said with Derek Jeter. Maybe he becomes more of an ownership guy who has a final say on things like Derek Jeter currently has down in Florida. I think anything is possible. I know there'll be some other current franchises who are looking for a top man who will try and reach out to him to try and sway him differently from what he said in this press conference, the Phillies and the Mets being two of those such teams. But Theo Epstein, is a lot of things, and he's a man of principle that I've come to know over all these years. And, he basically told us years ago this is what he was going to do. My shelf life with a certain organization is only such. And, even though he didn't stay 10 years, he pretty much kept his word that he moved on after a certain period of time. He said, during this press conference, which is still ongoing as we speak, that he intended to be a season ticket holder. Mm-hmm. He was going to sit in the stands at Wrigley Field. He's not going to take a dime from the Cubs this upcoming season. Don't worry, he's got plenty of money in the bank, folks. Yeah. And I think what he's going to do, he's going to raise money for good causes. Theo Epstein is a very, very intelligent man with a lot of interest outside of baseball as well. I think there will be a third incantation in baseball a year plus down the road from right now with another organization, or maybe a completely expansion franchise that might be on the horizon. But I think this upcoming season he will not be in baseball, and good for him. He deserves the rest, if that's what you want to call it.
One of the interesting things about Theo is that according to some, he is a liberal, and he has read books like there's a guy named Howard Zinn who is a staunch liberal and has written a book called The Real History of the United States, and it talks about all the abuses of capitalism and so forth. And apparently he's a fan of Howard Zinn. So I always found it kind of incredibly funny, ironic that here's a guy who purportedly is a liberal and leans towards this kind of Howard Zinn look at the world, and yet he's been working for the Ricketts, who are the polar opposite of that. These are staunch capitalists who love to make money at whatever cost.
Yeah, like I said, Theo Epstein, I guess the best way I can describe him is he's pretty damn deep. Where you can talk to him on so many different subjects, and he's a person who will also listen, and to the other point of view, he might not agree with it. That's why I think that he and Tom Ricketts, listen, they had a common goal, and that was to win a world championship, of which obviously they met, here in Chicago, and they made Tom Ricketts a lot of money in the process, and Theo made a lot of money himself. But Theo Epstein, like I said, is a pretty deep guy. it wouldn't be, surprising to me if he gets into politics at some point, but he does have baseball in his blood. He won one championship in Boston, actually two. He won a championship here in Chicago with the Cubs. And I think, for him, maybe he's looking for that trilogy or the trifecta with one other franchise somewhere down the road. But for this upcoming summer, and God willing, there are fans in the stands. I think Theo Epstein will be one of them as a Chicago Cubs season ticket holder.
Yeah, another graphic up on Marquee. The longest World Series title droughts that ended. The 2004 Red Sox, 86 years, and the 2016 Cubs, 108 years, and he clearly was a big part of that, leading the front office on both of those incredible victories.
All right, we still don't know where Les is. The old TV show Car 54, Where Are You?
Yes.
Les Grobstein, where are you?
There's a holdup in the Bronx, Brooklyn's broken out in fights. There's a traffic jam in Harlem that's backed up to Jackson Heights. There's a scout troop short a child, cruise ships do and idle wild. Car 54, where are you?
Ed Gwynn was on that show.
Yes.
He was Herman Munster later, and a few years later on the Munsters TV show.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who the other guy was. His name was like Tootie or Trudy or something like that.
Wasn't it Dick Van Dyke's brother, Jerry Van Dyke?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it was somebody else. I can't think of who the person is. Although you're the king of looking stuff up.
I will. The actor's name was Joey Ross.
Time to talk about sports.
Please lower your IQ.
I was going to ask Les about Mark Burley was nominated, or his name is now in the hopper for the Hall of Fame. Mark Burley had a great career mostly with the White Sox. 1 year with Miami, and then the last couple of years in Toronto. He was a guy who got more than the most out of his abilities. 38th round draft pick in the Major League Amateur Draft. Turned out to be a 5-time All-Star, a 4-time Golden Glove winner, 214 wins, a perfect game, a no-hitter on top of that. He won a World Series game and a save in back-to-back days down, and I was at both those games, but here in Chicago and then down in Houston. 200 innings 14 times, Mr. Reliable, great with the media, and I mean great with the media, of which, I'm always going to be thankful of. Is Mark Burley a Hall of Fame player?
I don't think so. I mean, there's certainly a lot of reasons to consider him, but the whole voting system for baseball's Hall of Fame is so weird. They just are slow to warm up to quality players, and he's a guy who won over 200 wins, like you said. But I just don't see it. I think that if he does get in, it'll be he certainly won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but maybe down the line, perhaps.
I think you're exactly right. I think somewhere down the road, the Veterans Committee, of which nowadays is getting more people into the Hall of Fame, will take a look at Mark Burley's accomplishments and say, yes, he deserved to be a Hall of Famer, but in general, the way the thing works right now, I don't see Mark. I think he'll be on the ballot for probably the next 5, 10, 15 years maybe, but I don't see him going in that way. But ultimately, and the Hall of Fame has been, listen, Mark Burley was a great pitcher, don't get me wrong, but the Hall of Fame has been watered down a little bit over the last 10 to 15 years. When I was growing up, it was the greatest of the great that got into the Hall of Fame. And it was almost an eye test for me. Yes, the guys who had 300 wins or 500 home runs, those were almost automatics. But then it sort of got a little bit cheaper here over the years. So I think ultimately maybe somewhere way down the road, Mark Burley gets into the Hall of Fame. But for right now, I don't see that happening. The Hall of Very Good is what they sometimes refer to it as, the guys who just are not able to get into the Hall of Fame. He certainly is one of those guys, the Hall of Very, Very Good. And like I said, ultimately, maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I can see him going in by the Veterans Committee. But no, I don't see Mark Burley going to the Hall of Fame, not in the near future.
Which of the 10,000 stories you've heard Les say would he have used to respond to that question?
I don't know. Lee Elia comes to mind no matter what I ever ask him.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
Listen, listen, Les has not been at the ballpark for the last decade for, whatever reasons. And so he really wasn't part of Mark Burley. Mark Burley was great. Mark Burley, first of all, I've only told 3 men in my life that I love them. Okay, my father, of course, my son, of course, and Mark Burley. Every time he pitched a game under 2 hours, I've told this story a lot also. Every time he did, I'd go up to him and go, Mark, I love you. Every person in the media would say that to Mark Burley after a 2-hour sub 2-hour game.
Oh.
But he was always great to the media. And when he was single, this is sort of a side note here. When he was single, I'll tell you what, Mark Burley was a great troller.
Really?
You know what? Oh, yeah. Mark Burley had some wonderful, wonderful eye candy that would come to the games when he was single. Okay? And so,
underline that.
Just had to point that out.
Well, yeah, why not? We all, as fans, like to know what's going on, with some of the personal stuff that players go through. And so if a particular baseball player, attracts very attractive women, wait, I want to know.
and he did, by the way. But, Burley, for so many other reasons, was great. I remember when John Danks first came to the White Sox, and Danks was a young pitcher with a lot of talent, obviously. Mark Burley took him under his wing. They were different kinds of pitchers. Burley never really threw over 85, 86 miles an hour. He was just a guy who was pinpoint control and would make you hit the ball to his fielders. His fielders loved it because he would pitch so quickly, never took time, too much time in between pitches. Always kept the fielders on their toes. Great fielding pitcher, like I said. He won 4 Gold Gloves. And who can ever forget that play where he made that play at first base with him and Konerko, where he threw the ball between his legs and then Konerko caught it one-handed.
Yeah.
So many great times. The perfect game with Dwayne Wise catching that ball, climbing the wall in left center field. And I was on the field, when he did that after the game, and on the field when he threw the no-hitter against the Texas Rangers. And then I was down in Houston, when he saved that game after Jeff Blum had hit the home run in the top of the 14th or 15th inning, and it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Here's Mark Burley, who had just won the game in Game 2, he comes out and saves the game in the 15th inning. I mean, he just gave me so many great memories. So, Mark Burley, continued success to you. I don't think he'll get into the Hall of Fame, at least not right away.
Now, a lot of the steroid guys are on the ballot this year. Sammy Sosa are again on the ballot. Do you foresee there being any crack in that kind of ban on those players who were suspected of doing steroids?
They're getting closer every year. I don't see Sammy ever going in. It's not just the steroids. It was other things with him. But the other guys, Barry Bonds is getting closer and closer each year. Roger Clemens is getting closer and closer each year. Curt Schilling almost got in last year, so there's a lot of reasons why he might be on the cusp this year. Eventually, I think all those guys go into the Hall of Fame. Listen, they were Hall of Fame players.
Yeah.
Just unfortunately, Barry Bonds was a great ball player before he started hitting 75 home runs and 700 and some odd home runs as a career. He was a 5-tool player, but then he saw that the other guys were getting success by pumping their bodies up, so he did the exact same thing. Roger Clemens was a great, great pitcher, but he wanted to continue to be a great, great pitcher. It's all alleged, but it's pretty obvious that all these guys, those guys included, started doing steroids. So, they're Hall of Fame players. They just, took some Flintstone vitamins at the end of their career. I don't know how else to put it.
That's well put.
Anyway, why don't we take a break right here, and when we come back, even though Les is not here, we'll do our famous name segment and also the Stump the Aldo, contest.
We're going to be giving out a lot of T-shirts.
Anyway, we'll be back right after this.
Recently, on Stuff Your Mom Threw Out, Mark Giangreco recalled this Ernie Banks story.
I also remember times when we hired Ernie Banks to be our Cubs analyst during the 84 playoff run. And we're sitting at an empty Wrigley Field on an off day shooting a special. And, we took a little break. This family was getting a private tour of Wrigley Field. And this little kid came up to ask for Ernie's autograph. And, of course, Ernie, he was the greatest guy in the world, the friendliest person on earth. And he's like, Mr. Banks, can I have your autograph? And his wife at the time ran up, no autographs after 5 o'clock. And we only do so many on certain days. But she would regulate the number of autographs that he did and regulate the time in which he was allowed to give them.
Stuff Your Mom Throughout with David Schuster and Scott Beatty, only on the Barroom Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm David Schuster. He is not Les Grobstein. He is Aldo Gandia. Les, we put out an Amber Alert for you. Where the hell are you?
I hope he's okay.
Anyway, we continue on. Why don't we do the two segments that we always do at the end of our podcast with Les, Aldo, and the first one is Stump the Grobber.
You're about to witness the work of an eidetic. That is someone whose memories are more vivid beyond that of most mortals. Today, we will put that to the test. This is Stump the Grobber.
All right, Stump the Grobber minus the Grobber right now here on the Grobstein-Schuster podcast. Aldo filling in for Les right now. And, in homage to Theo Epstein and the Cubs, we're just going to do Cubs questions this week. And so the first one, Aldo, is, Babe Ruth hit that famous home run at Wrigley Field in the 1932 World Series. It was the one where he called the shot, and a lot of people swear that he did call the shot. Anyway, do you know who the pitcher who gave up that home run to Babe Ruth?
I'm going to answer this like Les would.
In other words, you're going to stall for 10 minutes and not know the answer.
Exactly.
I'm try and dazzle us with a bunch of bullshit.
Right. Do you know they used to order hot dogs from the Bat Boy? Tell the Bat Boy to go run and get him a hot dog? I have no idea who that is.
Charlie Root.
Oh, I've heard the name.
Trivia question. I don't think Les would have gotten that one either, to be honest with you. So Les would have been 0 for 1 so far.
Les can't even remember that we're doing a show today, so it's unlikely he would have remembered that.
Yeah. See, he doesn't remember the present. He only remembers the past.
That's true.
That's why he doesn't remember doing this. Anyway, all right. The Cubs, when they came into the major leagues, and I don't know when that was. It was, late 19th century, something like that. Do you remember the original name of the Chicago Cubs? Very original name.
Yeah, that I remember. It is. The Chicago. Is it the White Stockings or the Colts? The Colts.
It is the White Stockings. Now you have a computer in front of you, so you know what? You can fool me once, but you can't fool me twice.
We can see each other on video, so I was trying to be nonchalant about it.
All right, so you know what? You don't get that one right either, and Les definitely wouldn't have got one. But I'm going to go one more.
Okay.
Before they were the original Chicago White Stockings, okay? And then eventually they became the Cubs, the early 20th century. But right before they became the Chicago Cubs, they have a bunch of different names. Do you know what their name was right before they became the Cubs?
The Orphans.
You see, you're still cheating.
I don't know any of this shit. I was drinking all night yesterday watching that Bears game. You think I remember?
Right, let's try you another one. What was the name of the cursed goat? Turn your computer
No,
on.
that one I know.
All right, what was the name of the goat that Sam Sionis, what was his name of his goat that he tried to get into Wrigley Field and they wouldn't let him in, and then he put the curse on the Cubs?
That was Kim Kardashian.
Kim Kardashian, yes.
I don't know.
Miss Bubble Butt herself.
It's Billy Goat Sionis, but the name of the goat, I don't recall that.
Yeah, the goat had a name.
Oh, really? What the hell was it?
Murphy.
I should have known that.
Yes.
I'm sure Murphy at the score probably said that 100 times. I must have heard it.
No doubt. On his yellow legal pad, I'm sure Murph probably had Murphy. Sam Sionis it was the 1945 World Series. He tried to get the damn goat in. They wouldn't let him in. I don't know why. Probably didn't have enough money or maybe he didn't equal a certain height limit to get in. I don't know why they didn't let the damn goat in. But then Sam Sionis put that curse on because they wouldn't let his goat in. His goat's name was Murphy. All right, let's try this one. Ferguson Jenkins came from the Phillies in 1964. What two veteran pitchers did the Cubs trade to get Fergie Jenkins from the Phillies?
Jeez. I know this, but I've forgotten. It's like, oh God, two guys who went on and did not have any success after they were traded. But I don't recall the names.
All right, you will recall them when I tell you. The first one was Bob Buell.
Yeah.
And the other one was Larry Jackson.
Yeah. Man, oh, man.
So that was a trade that really panned out for the Chicago Cubs.
One of the greatest trades in Cubs history. One of the, from a positive standpoint, everybody always talks about the Lou Brock, Ernie Broglio trade, but on a total opposite. This one was one that was in favor of the Cubs. So, hey, it's a wash, in my opinion. And then Fergie Jenkins would throw as many complete games as pitchers have victories now. You know, you look at Fergie Jenkins' stat line, games, complete games, and it's like always in the 20s. Every season, there's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It's amazing.
Yeah, different era, of course, but Fergie Jenkins, fit in with the Koufaxes and the Drysdales and the Gibsons and the Marichals. He was of that era where if he got the ball to start the game, he wanted to finish the game as well. All right, let's go on to our next and final segment here on the Grobstein Schuster minus Grobstein podcast zone. And now we're going to do names and places.
You enter this final segment of the show at your own risk, because what you might think of someone or someplace may not match your reality. Memories could be shattered or confirmed. This is Names and Places.
All right, names and places here on the podcast. And I'm wondering if Les forgot to do his time change about 4 weeks ago. And he thinks he's going to call in an hour from now or something like that.
By the way, I hope we're going to do like stripper names and places. I'll have much better success at that.
Oh, God. Listen, I could fill an hour with that one for sure. All right, now let's try this one, though. The first name on our list is Pat Piper.
Oh, get your pencils and scorecards ready. I have today's lineup, or whatever he would say. But yeah, that was the voice you would hear when you'd go to Wrigley Field. And I don't recall if I ever saw a picture of him, but just by the sound of his voice, I've always had a picture in my mind of what he would look like an older man whose face was kind of starting to fall a bit because of his age and so forth, and somebody who smoked a lot of cigarettes and had a couple of pops while watching a game. Did you ever meet him?
Yeah, actually early on when I first started working, Pat Piper was still on the job back in those days. You have to understand, he was the Cubs PA announcer for 58 years.
Wow.
So he was a young man, obviously, when he started, not a young man when he finally finished. The story is, and I had to look this up, he actually started out as a vendor for the Cubs.
Really?
Going all, back, and that was at, before Wrigley Field, it was at West Side Park, where they apparently played a long time ago. And they needed somebody to do it, and I don't know how he came to do it, but he was the guy. And originally, he would have a megaphone. Back in those days, remember they used to have megaphones, and he would run up and down the first baseline or the third baseline with the megaphone doing the announcing for whatever crowd was at the games. Then ultimately he would sit behind, when they finally, had the technical advances of having a PA system, he would sit behind Wrigley Field, behind home plate, I should say, where Marla Collins came years later, obviously. And what's also interesting about Pat Piper, obviously they didn't pay him very well back in the day. He was a waiter. They played day games. He was a waiter at the old Ivanhoe restaurant. I'm not really sure where that was, but you could see him doing the PA announcing at Cub games, and then you can see him being a waiter over the Ivanhoe restaurant.
Yeah, I want to say it was on Ivanhoe was on Grand Avenue, but yeah, isn't that amazing? Now, you and Les have shared the story a couple of times about the famous porn star Seika. She would go to Wrigley Field games, and then like around the seventh inning, she'd go out, hide out in the dugout area, and nobody knew what she was doing. So my question to you is, did she ever go up and meet Pat Piper, and did he ever get his pencil and scorecard out?
Well, oh gosh, how do I want to touch that one?
Sorry.
He might have used that megaphone in another way. I'm not really sure. I don't know if Pat Piper and Sega ever intersected, if you will.
Okay.
Oh, my God. One of these days, I'm going to write my own book. It'll be a comic book. All right, let's go to the next name.
Okay.
The next name on the list, Tommy Lasorda right now.
Yeah. Well, Tommy is ill, right? He's
very ill right now. I hate to say it. He's in the hospital, and the last report was he's in intensive care. He's got some heart problems. He's 93 years old, and he's led a great life. And I don't know what his near-term status is. I hope he gets out of the hospital, but definitely a character.
One of the great baseball personalities of all time, and we were all very fortunate, those of us our age who got to see him manage. We were all very fortunate to do so because a number of times there were microphones put on him, and so we got all this great sound of him arguing with umpires, with him managing his team, and some of the things that he would say. And then, of course, I'm sure you have tons of stories about some of the things he would say to reporters after the game. But he was just a great, great personality and just so big and bold and from all accounts, not a bad baseball manager.
No, not a bad baseball manager at all. 71 years in the Dodgers organization. Wow. 71 years. What's interesting, and Les would have been great on this one. Les, where the hell are you? But Dave Kingman hit 3 home runs at Wrigley Field against the Dodgers, and he was asked about Kingman after the game, and it was one of his all-time rants and eruptions. And Les, I believe, has this on tape if you would ever find it somewhere. It's probably under his bed or something. And anyway, so that was one of the all-time rants. Now, what's interesting about Tommy Lasorda, he holds the major league record. He was a pitcher back in the day. Mm-hmm. He holds the minor league record, 25 strikeouts in a game. He struck out 25.
Wow.
Okay?
I didn't know that.
He pitched 15 innings in a minor league game and struck out 25. I guess back way, way, way back, they just let him go on and on and on. He had one start as a major league pitcher. One start in the major leagues. He threw 3 wild pitches in 1 inning and never pitched in a major league game ever again after that.
That is a wild story. Wow.
Yeah. Ultimately, he got back. I think he was in the Yankees organization for a short while also. Then he came back to the Dodgers. He was a third base coach for Walter Alston. You talk about 2 guys who intersected at different times of their life. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he became the Dodgers manager for years and years and years, won the World Series. What I do remember, listen, he was a true Italian. He loved his Italian pasta. I saw him out in some restaurants a couple of times in Chicago myself over the years. But sometimes he had that plate of pasta after the game sitting on his desk, and he would be chomping away, the noodles coming up and down his chin, talking to the media. He was a character and a half, and like I said, I hope his health gets a little bit better, but right now, apparently, he's not doing very well.
Hang in there, Tommy. Wishing you the best.
Absolutely. A Hall of Famer for sure. All right, the next name on our list, Skip Bayless.
Skip Bayless. What an asshole. Skip, we all knew him from his days at writing for the Tribune, but before that, he was a sports writer, I think, in Dallas, and then came to the Chicago Tribune, followed the money here, and then after he left the Tribune here, he he was well hated here. He kind of knew that one way to become famous is by just being a contrarian and offering up stupid opinions about stuff. And then he's taken that formula for success. He took it to ESPN, and where he had great success there, and then now over at Fox Sports TV. So he's the kind of guy that everything he says from an opinion standpoint, you almost take with a grain of salt because you wonder if he's just not saying something to create a viral moment. And so I don't particularly care for the guy, don't particularly listen to him anymore. But when he was here writing for the Chicago Tribune, I remember reading his stuff and thinking he was an asshole back then, too.
Yeah, and I think you summed him up perfectly. Not only was he had Dallas before he came here, he's been in major markets. He started off in Miami with the Miami Herald. He was with the LA Times. A couple publications in Dallas, came up to Chicago. He was only in Chicago working for the Tribune for a short time, a year or two. And I remember always, arguing with the guy. And I wasn't sure if he was just wrong about everything or intentionally just arguing the opposite. The contrarian is the perfect word for him. Anyway, yeah, he's made a lot of money being a contrarian or an asshole, whatever you want to call it. He's made a lot of money. I don't know if I would sell my soul to do that. Maybe I would. I'm not really sure. But he's made it work very well for himself over the years. All right, the last name on the list is actually a venue. It's the Allstate Arena.
Oh, my goodness. I have seen some great concerts at the Allstate Arena. I saw Prince at the Allstate Arena. Now, that place was terrible from an acoustic standpoint. I mean, you watched a concert there, and the music was just bouncing all over the place. But watching Prince live, who cares? It was a great moment. Seeing tons of sporting events there, everything from the DePaul women's basketball team. I saw them play there. I've seen the Chicago Sky play there. I've seen Chicago Wolves games played there. Circus events, you name it. And of course, my earliest memory of the Allstate Arena was that the roof caved in when it was in construction. A plane was flying overhead and things weren't sturdy enough, and that thing caved in. I don't think anybody passed away during.
Actually, they did. There was some workers. It was 1979 when the place was being built. And, there was a terrible accident. At least one, maybe more than that. I'm not really sure. But it was back then, when it was originally opened up, it was called the Horizon.
Right.
Okay, and then they changed it to the Allstate Arena. And you're right. I've saw some great concerts. I saw Supertramp there, which I thought was fantastic. They've had indoor soccer there. They've had wrestling. I've seen wrestling matches. They had minor league hockey with the Wolves. They had arena football. Grobber has done games there for women's basketball and indoor soccer and maybe some hockey as well. So all these different things have been there over the years. I used to work for this entity that we would do like a wrestling 976 number and so they used to have matches there. And I would go interview these wrestlers, and we were in on the whole gag long in advance of everything, and we knew the script in advance also.
Oh, wow.
And these guys were great. I mean, they would beat each other over the heads all the time, with chairs and everything else. Then a half hour later, they'd go across the street on Mannheim, and they'd be drinking with each other. Some of the all-time comedy stuff of all time. But, the Rosemont Horizon and now the Allstate Arena has been home to a lot of great events, including concerts, like you said, Aldo. And actually, probably one of the great basketball games of all time there was when Illinois defeated Arizona, and I'm terrible on years. I think it was 2005, or maybe it was earlier than that. I can't remember. Anyway, they won against Arizona. They went on to the Final Four by winning that game. They were down like 15 points with 4 minutes to go and rallied to win the game. So, there's been some great, great, great memories. When DePaul was at its best, they would win there all the freaking time against everybody. They were the number one team in the nation, and that place would be jam-packed, jam-packed. So, the Allstate Arena, great memories over all these years.
For sure. That's you brought back a bunch of memories just saying that, and of course DePaul with Mark Aguirre, Ray Meyer, and so forth. I've forgotten those games were at the Allstate Arena, the Horizon back then. Those were great, great days, and was great.
I also saw one other thing, if I remember correctly. They had what was called it was a tennis tournament of challenge or something like that, and it was the all-time coldest day in Chicago. Wind chill of 80 some odd degrees below zero, 25 below without the wind chill. And all the greats were playing there. It was Connors and Lendl and McEnroe and Borg. And myself and George Hoffman would go there. It was so freaking cold. Whenever the door would open up, you would feel it in the building, and of course none of the cars started after, we'd be inside for 3, 4, 5 hours or whatever it was. And of course your car wouldn't start, when you come back out there. Right. So that's yet another memory from all those years there.
I got a memory of my uncle stealing car batteries.
Wait a second. I had my battery stolen a couple of times.
That was my Uncle Mike.
Hey, Uncle Mike, you owe me, buddy.
He's dead now, by the way, but
Well, you know what? You're his heir or something like that.
We'll have a brand new diehard battery waiting for you next time you come over.
Fair enough. Anyway, thanks for filling in. Grobstein, wherever you are, I hope you're okay.
Yeah, me too.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.